All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. So, I'm going to talk about how your environment affects your genes. I wanted to make a Mindgasms vlog about this because one of our last mixed mental arts chats, maybe a month or so ago, was on the book Behave by Robert Sapolsky. I love that book. That made me want to make another video about what I've learned from his work. For those of you who don't know, mixed mental arts is the group of people interested in basically taking an interdisciplinary approach to learning, mixing the mental arts. It was started based on the podcast that is now called The Brian Callen Show again, with the comedian and actor Brian Callen, also known as the Emperor of the Callen Fate, and he's been in movies like The Hangover, for example. And he is talking all the time along with his super smart co-host, Hunter Motz, who is a tutor and co-author of the book The Straight A Conspiracy with Katie O'Brien. If you don't know who Robert Sapolsky is, he's a neuroendocrinologist and professor of biology and neurology at Stanford University. He's also the author of many books, including his most recent one called Behave, which is essentially an interdisciplinary examination of human behavior. Sapolsky has spent decades studying baboons in their natural environment. So I'm going to talk in this vlog about how your environment affects your genes. There are still many people and at least a few scientists who either almost or explicitly argue for genetic determinism. They act like genes completely shape or at least have an enormous impact on our personalities, behavior, and even intelligence and financial success in life. But anyone who's learned anything about biology, even if you've only read a handful or so of books about it, probably understands that genes are just one of many factors involved with human behavior. Genes are one of many relevant biological considerations, and this is just one of the several different types of factors that should be considered when we try to decipher many questions. Why humans behave the way we do, what makes us who we are, how intelligent we are, and how successful we might end up being in life is due to a lot more than just biology. The biological causes of behavior, including genes, are heavily influenced and altered by non-biological factors. These include our environment, culture, and interactions with people. Of course, none of these operate independently. They're all interconnected and affect each other in varying degrees. Aspects of our biology, like genes, are heavily influenced by our interactions with our environments, cultures, and people within these environments and cultures. Our cultures are a large aspect of our environments, and our cultural values have an effect on our genetic expression. Our morals, for example, are heavily influenced by those of our surrounding culture, and this has a large impact on what genes are turned on and off that in turn help shape our chosen values. Also, our interactions with people in our cultures and environments help determine our partially genetic judgments of what aspects of our cultural morals we agree and disagree with. So what we think is good and bad and what we value is partially biological, but our temperaments and individual characteristics are also partially determined by what we think about our culture. Our opinions are always affected by what our friends, families, and idols think, and what our enemies and the people we hate think. So one of the scientific findings from many studies that Robert Sapolsky talks about in his book Behave and his Stanford lectures that you can watch on YouTube is this: your environment determines what genes get turned on and off during childhood development. This means that all of our biology is to some degree influenced by our environment. Evolution is about adaptation, right? So which of our genetic predispositions become strong aspects of our biology is heavily impacted by the environment that we have to deal with when we're growing up and figuring out how to survive in the world. We could be genetically predisposed to having asthma, but maybe the genes for that won't get turned off if we are raised in an environment that compensates a lot for what might normally lead to asthma. So if you have the genes for asthma, but you're raised in a place where you can breathe very easily, you might not get it. Growing up in a town or city and a home with very good air quality could potentially prevent you from getting asthma. Prenatal environmental effects are another massively important factor to consider. Relatively recently, in terms of scientific discoveries, if I remember correctly, copious studies have shown how large of an impact the environment can have on pregnant mothers. For example, if a pregnant mother experiences severe malnutrition in her third trimester, this can increase the chances of her child developing certain diseases by tenfold. So, in some third world countries where a pregnant mother might be living in poverty and starving, her lack of nutrients in her third trimester will be dramatically more likely to cause her child to have some particular diseases. Another way that Sapolsky says your genes can be affected by your environment is your gene heritability. This itself is a complex concept and would take a whole other fucking video or blog to just barely scratch the surface of it. It's so difficult to understand and explain that a lot of people misunderstand it and describe it incorrectly. Basically, gene heritability means what genes you inherit from each of your parents. Actually, I might have even gotten confused about that explanation there. I think I was talking about inheritability rather than heritability, which are two separate ideas in biology. According to the internet, though, heritability is the degree of variation in a phenotypic trait, which is due to the genetic variation of that trait between individuals within a particular population. Your phenotype is basically your visual biological characteristics based on your interactions with your environment. It's what you look like based on which genes to do with your appearance are turned on and off during your upbringing. This means that your heritability is the variation in your appearance based on the degree of difference in physical traits between individual people in your environment. So, how much variation there is in terms of, for example, the size of people's noses in your local environment has a large influence on which genes from your parents get turned on and off and determine the size of your own nose. The qualitative and quantitative effects of a gene also differ according to your environment. This means that any hormone, for example, testosterone, can work better or worse depending on your local surroundings. As with all similar genetic changes due to your environment, these adaptations can be solidified during childhood development, but humans are always adaptable. That doesn't stop when we're adults. So if you move to a completely different country from where you grew up, the genetic expression of your testosterone can change depending on factors like the local climate and elevation. It can contribute to your testosterone working either more or less efficiently. Those are the qualitative effects of your local environment on your genes. Since there can also be quantitative effects, this means that your testosterone levels can increase or decrease depending on your environment as well. So if you move to a country with a completely different climate and or elevation, it can potentially raise or lower your genetic testosterone levels. But of these qualitative and quantitative effects that are adaptations to your environment, both of these qualitative and quantitative effects are adaptations to your environment, and that's how evolution works, right? So anyway, another way that your environment can affect your genetic expression is in the realm of intelligence. Sapolsky talks about how poverty overwhelms genes in the development of intelligence. This means that if you're poor, you can end up being dumber than you would have been if you were financially stable, even if you were genetically predisposed to becoming very smart. This makes poverty an even more concerning problem since it can potentially lead to poor people being less intelligent. That's obviously less important than people starving, but it's another bad result of poverty. It's also important to remember that environmental effects are usually fairly weak in comparison to something like poverty. Everything I've talked about so far can affect genetic expression for sure, but this tends to be milder at the most moderate. However, being poor is far from the only environmental factor that can have a strong impact on genes. Most environmental factors seem to have slight or perhaps medium level effects, but it's important to remember that there are copious specific aspects of environments that are so strong that they overwhelm genes. Since genetic effects are generally much stronger than environmental factors, we should understand that there are many exceptions. Factors like poverty can have very powerful effects on our genetic expression. So anyway, those are the main lessons that I've learned from Robert Sapolsky about how our environments affect our genes. As always, thank you to everyone so much for watching this Mindgasms vlog. Check out Robert Sapolsky's book, Behave, and his Stanford lectures on YouTube. They cover a lot of material that is similar to his book. Thank you everyone so much for those of you who subscribe to my channel and to those of you who've contributed to me on Patreon. Also, as always, thank you so fucking much to anyone else who subscribes to my channel or likes this video, and to anyone else who contributes to me on Patreon. It means a fuck of a lot to me, and I really appreciate it. You have no idea how much it means to me, and it gives me more time to work on fascinating content that will hopefully give you as many mindgasms as I get from learning. Keep being the tiny beams of light that shine through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. I love you all, and most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. Alright, everyone, keep having mindgasms, and adios until next time.